Electrification, when blended with an internal combustion engine for the purposes of efficiency, that's like seriously old hat. It was 20 years ago that hit the mainstream. But electrification, when blended with an internal combustion engine for the purposes of performance, that was unobtainium 10 years ago. But over the past 5 years, you and I have driven some crazy fast gas engine cars that have a plug. Just recently, we drove one with almost 700 horsepower. But even that, it's kind of become an old hat to the point where we should try something practical with only a measly 400 to 500 horsepower and a plug. Right at the top of this episode, we need to clear some potential confusion up. You may remember a couple of weeks ago we drove the 2021 Porsche Panamera 4 SE Hybrid. Now one would think, well, these two vehicles, one's tall, one's kind of lower, but they have the same engine and second propulsion system. There you would be wrong. You see, it's the gas engine that's different. That car had the 2.9 twin turbo V6. This has the 3-liter single turbo V6, which used to be the base engine in the Panamera. That's kind of changed now. Here it is good for 335 horsepower and 332 pound-feet of torque. Then there's that electric motor. That is the same from the 4 SE Hybrid, 134 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. Now we have discussed in many episodes where we featured two propulsion systems that sit side by side. You can't take the individual silos of output, put them together, and you get the total system output. It's a little bit more complicated than that. In this case, it is 455 horsepower and 516 pound-feet of torque. Now, I've specifically not shared all the different engine speeds between the two propulsion systems, but the one I'm going to share with you, that 516 pound-feet of torque, comes in at 1,000 RPM. Which brings us to the business of getting that torque to the road, which there is only one option on offer in a Cayenne Coupe hybrid, and that is a combination of all-wheel drive with an 8-speed Tiptronic. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, it's not really an Audi transmission shoved into a Porsche. It's a Porsche transmission that is not a dual clutch, not a PDK. It has a torque converter. The reason why they went with the torque converter option over the PDK option was to manage the torque coming out of the electric motor. And for the avoidance of doubt, that's 295 pound-feet of torque that comes in at 100 RPM. Either way, that combination does pay some dividends in more practical areas. For example, towing 7,716 pounds. And then, of course, there are the two reasons why this vehicle exists. The first and most obvious would be the efficiency. Around town in gas mode, it's pretty respectable considering the size and power, 21 mpg. However, if you were to go on the US government fuel economy site, that's done by the US EPA, they say MPGE for an almost 500 horsepower SUV is 41. And then, of course, there is the second and far more important reason for being the performance figures. And here, there's quite a sizable jump over the same vehicle without a plug. Like, for example, 0 to 60 drops from 5.7 to 4.8 seconds. VMAX increases by 6 to 157 miles an hour. Okay, so it's not a surprise to you that a second propulsion system, it adds a little bit of weight. In this case, 5,265 pounds, depending on how you express your weights, it measures 2,388 kilograms. However, the surprise is this. That is an almost 13% jump over the same vehicle with only one propulsion system. That's about the biggest weight gain you and I have ever experienced. With that. Oh, it goes. Wow, does this thing go? In a really good way, like unexpected way. Power delivery is particularly good between 2,500 and about 4,000 RPM. And now granted, you and I recently drove the newer version of the Panamera with a 2.9, and that thing was downright fast. This, it slides in kind of under that. That engine, it has a bit more finesse than this package. This is just more raw brute force. which is a welcome thing in a vehicle that has a plug. Aside from the plug, what you are looking at is a very unusual corner in the Porsche world, and it's not just the model, the Cayenne Coupe hybrid, it's also this specific copy of it, serial ending 108. Let's start with the obvious, and that is the electrification system. No, it does not have that same more dense battery that we experienced in both the 4SE hybrid as well as that Sport Turismo Turbo SE hybrid, the crazy one we drove. This one has the older, smaller battery. So best case scenario, somewhere between 20, maybe 25 miles of electric driving range. And that battery is coupled with a 7.2 kilowatt charger. And no, that is not fitted as standard. One has to pay extra for the 7.2 kilowatt, which begs the question, which one is fitted as standard? Then there are the underpinnings. Here, very unusual but very beneficial changes. Let's start with the brakes. The front rotors grow from 350 mils to 360 mils. The back, much bigger growth, 330 to 358. And that brings us to the aspect that makes this Cayenne Coupe plug-in stand out. You see, most people would look at this thing and say, wow, that's a bone stock Cayenne. There's like no options on it. Usually when you feature these things on the show, they always have crazy amounts of options, like that Panamera Sport Turismo Turbo SE hybrid. It's like a $240,000 car. This has practically no options. However, the one it does have is the performance package, which is an upgrade to the 3-chamber air ride, which gives it that adaptive roll stabilization, which in turn relies on a 48-volt suspension system. That in turn is backed up with all-wheel steering. I'll give you a hint here. When most people are speccing out their Cayennes and they're going light on options, they usually don't go heavy on a suspension tuning option that has the sole purpose of keeping a tall plug-in SUV from leaning side to side when aggressively going in and out of turns. That aside, there are two other things that are a bit different about a Cayenne Coupe plug-in. First is the coefficient of drag. That goes up by 1 point when you have the plug-in. I don't know why. And then there is the weight distribution. That changes for the better in the plug-in. My guess is that electric motor that sits more in the middle of the vehicle. That's the only thing I got. One of the things that stands out here is those smaller wheels and tires. In other words, it doesn't have like the tractor wheels on this thing, which makes for a ride quality that's better than most other Cayennes you and I have driven. One of the biggest things you notice here, aside from the benefit from the smaller wheels and tires, you don't feel this is a 5,300 pound vehicle. That is kind of incredible because it's a 5,300 pound vehicle that probably feels like it's 4,300 pounds. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game, Mind the Options game, with today's contestant. Something we rarely feature in a round of the game, and that would be a Porsche with very few options. Believe it or not, they do exist, so let's dive right in to the 2021 Porsche Cayenne Coupe E Hybrid. That means it has a plug for $86,400. To that, we add a gray. I just do not like gray cars, especially when you have something so unique like this vehicle. Granted, I wouldn't call it beautiful, maybe handsome, but remember the one we drove in Österreich, the chalk one that had the herringbone seats, or that stunning red with the herringbone seats, either way with the gray wheels? Why don't you go with that? Especially this quartzite gray metallic. I mean, it's handsome, but $800 extra. To that, we add the standard interior in black with Mojave beige. I have to say, this looks unusually good, and I would suggest this in most Porsches where people want to go light on options, because it's tan seats, it's tan on the door panels, but on the top of the door panels, the dash, and most importantly, the carpets, all the high-wear items, those are black. That's a great touch, and it looks incredibly cool on top of being practical. But that practicality does have a price of $390. Speaking of practical, there's another option here, the 2+1 rear seat. That means this is a 5-seater, not a 4-seater. Remember, the Cayenne Coupes, they come standard as a 4-seater. Either way, there's no charge for this option, but we do have to pay extra for heated seats, only in the front, $530. Let me remind you, the base price on this car was $86,000, yet they want over $500 for heated seats. Comfort access, that is putting the key in your pocket, go up to the door, it opens the door, and you get in the car and just, well, you don't hit the button because it's a Porsche, so it's a Le Mans start, so it's over here. Either way, that is $940. I'd like to remind you, That is standard on most fancy Hyundais. Auto dimming mirrors, $420. Again, standard on most basic, well not basic, but fancy Hyundais. Lane change assist, $950. The Bose surround system. Now this is something that is perplexing to me. Clearly, someone has tried this exercise to have a lightly optioned Porsche. So why would one add the Bose surround system? It's good, but it's $1,200. I would say take that budget and add it maybe to another $4,000 and get the Burmester, which really kicks, or just save that money and put it into another option. Then there is the smartphone compartment, which is another way of saying the Qi wireless charging, for $690. Standard on most Hyundais. Then the summer tires, that at least is free. And then we get into a very perplexing option, the 7.2 kilowatt charger. Now, most EVs that you and I have looked at as of late, they come standard with a 7.2 kilowatt charger. It's kind of like run of the mill at this point. Yeah, there was that Volkswagen ID4. That's now standard with an 11 kilowatt charger. Now here's the reason why you would want the 7.2 kilowatt or the 11 kilowatt charger over, say, a 6.6, which was kind of run of the mill a couple of years ago. It charges the vehicle faster. So I'm a little bit surprised that in an $86,400 vehicle, we have to pay an additional $840 for what is kind of becoming the norm in electric cars. And then we press on to arguably the most important option fitted to this specific vehicle, and this is the option that makes a Cayenne a Cayenne. That would be the performance package. That is made up of the adaptive suspension with PASM and the four-wheel steering together. Those are $4,900. Money incredibly well spent on this vehicle, especially one with all that extra weight. And then there is this sport exhaust system with the black tailpipes. Believe it or not, that's free. So I guess I sort of take back all the hatred on the heated seats and the comfort access being extra. Anyway, we do have to add the destination and handling for $1,350 for a total suggested retail price, which, believe it or not, is below $100,000. Not by much, $99,410. Being you and I have been incredibly good savers, let's spend a little bit, go into e-Power, and drive this thing on sunshine. As we learned in our recent Porsche Panamera Turbo SE Hybrid Sport Turismo, wow, that is quite a name. You can't really push this thing to within an inch of its life because then the gas engine will kick on. So we're going to drive this somewhat moderately as you would driving it around town. And here I'm just kind of commuting. Granted, a better road, but I'm kind of commuting and it feels like a Porsche Cayenne. Okay, so tame acceleration in this mode aside, there are three aspects about this PHEV application in this Cayenne that stand out. First and foremost, there is the sound. Maybe it's me, call me crazy. I have a hard time getting used to Cayennes without crazy sport exhausts. And then there is the steering, and here, whether you're driving it aggressively or not, this comes down to a choice. Why does one choose a PHEV over, say, a battery electric vehicle? And I would argue one of the arguments here is to maintain a certain driving dynamics, a threshold of driving dynamics. And what do I mean by that? There's weight, there's feedback to this steering, which is not usually the case even in fancier plugins. And last, but certainly not least, would be the brakes. This is an area I always like to check in on with these types of vehicles, because sadly a lot of these succumb to this like on-off feel with the brake pedal. This case, not at all. However, when using these brakes in lower speed situations like around town, in and out of traffic, there is a bit of a different feel. It's not the feedback or modulation that changes. You can feel the brakes are just doing a bit more than stopping the vehicle. I'm gonna say it, I like this better with the plug. Now I will fully admit, the specific vehicle you and I drove today, the fact that it was sparsely optioned, and that those options were very much focused on performance driving and very well matched with the right wheel and tire size for the purpose of this vehicle, made it stand out, especially with the way it delivers power. Now that said, I will say there is a wish list here. The wish list is kind of simple here because we've already gotten some of them granted over in the Panamera world. Like for example, why stick with the 3-liter here? Let's go with the 2.9 twin turbo, which is already in the 4 SE hybrid over on the Panamera side. Let's make it the case over here. And then while we're pilfering some changes from the Panamera world, how about the larger, more dense battery? Yeah, it's only 30 to 40 miles of range, but is more usable than this. And at that, I do have to make a point here. Yes, this one is below 100 grand, but I don't think there is price sensitivity here. So let's say, for the sake of discussion, these things were an extra 2 grand to bring about a battery that could do anywhere between, say, 70 and 100 miles of range. I honestly believe that would open up the market for a vehicle like this to more people. But as I have said in the past, when I have big requests on my wish list, I am but one man. So I will turn this around to you and ask, is there anything I have forgotten on this wish list to make this a better package? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I will say it again, man, I like cars with plugs because they put more time in your day. The fact that they're a Porsche and kind of drive like this and still have some practicality to fit Kumo in the back makes it all the better. Until I see you next time, bis später.